Why does anxiety lie to us? At first, the question sounds strange, because anxiety doesn't speak. It doesn't have a voice. It doesn't sit across from you and make arguments. So how could it possibly lie? Perhaps because the most convincing lies are the ones we tell ourselves without realizing it. Think about the last time you were deeply anxious. Maybe you were waiting for the results of a medical exam. Maybe someone you loved stopped replying to your messages. Maybe you were about to walk into a job interview. Or perhaps nothing had happened at all. Yet your mind behaved as though disaster had already arrived. Your heart accelerated. Your breathing changed. Your body prepared for a battle that existed nowhere except inside your imagination. That raises an uncomfortable question. If nothing had happened, why did your body react as if everything had? Most people believe anxiety begins with fear, but what if that's only part of the story? What if anxiety begins with something much more ordinary? A thought. Not just any thought. A thought that arrives quietly and is accepted without being questioned. What if I fail? What if something is wrong? What if they leave? What if this never gets better? Notice something. None of those sentences describe reality. They describe possibilities. Yet within seconds, possibilities begin to feel like certainty. The mind quietly replaces "this could happen" with "this is probably going to happen." That single shift changes everything, because your body cannot always distinguish between a real threat and one that exists only in your imagination. It simply responds to whatever your mind repeatedly presents as true. And perhaps that is the first lie anxiety tells. Not that something bad is possible. Bad things are possible. The lie is convincing you that possibility deserves the same emotional weight as certainty. Those two things are not the same, yet millions of people live as though they are. And without realizing it, they begin fighting battles that have never actually begun. The strange thing about anxiety is that it often disguises itself as wisdom. It whispers, "I'm only trying to prepare you. I'm helping you stay ahead. If you think about every possible outcome, you'll be ready." That sounds responsible. It even sounds intelligent. Until you notice what it costs. Hours spent replaying conversations that never happened. Sleepless nights preparing for failures that never arrived. Energy invested in solving problems that never existed. Anxiety makes one promise over and over again. If you think about it long enough, you'll finally feel in control. But has that ever been true? Think about your own life. How many hours have you spent worrying, only to discover that reality looked nothing like the story your mind created? Probably more than you can count. This is where anxiety becomes incredibly persuasive, because every once in a while, the thing you worried about actually happens. And when it does, your mind quietly says, "See? I told you." What it never mentions are the hundreds of imagined disasters that never became reality. This is how anxiety gains credibility. Not by always being right, but by being unforgettable when it is. The human mind remembers emotional pain far more vividly than emotional relief. You rarely celebrate the catastrophe that never happened. You simply move on. But the one painful experience, the embarrassing conversation, the rejection, the unexpected loss, those memories remain. And anxiety uses them like evidence in a courtroom. It builds an argument. You've been hurt before, so it will happen again. You failed once, so you'll probably fail again. You lost someone, so everyone will eventually leave. Do you see what happened? The mind quietly turned experience into prophecy, not because the future has already been written, but because fear prefers prediction over uncertainty. And sometimes, a false prediction feels safer than an unknown tomorrow. Here's another lie anxiety tells. It convinces you that certainty is something human beings are supposed to possess. Think about how much of your life has always been uncertain. You never truly knew how your first day at school would end. You didn't know who would become your closest friends. You didn't know which opportunities would change your future. You didn't know which mistakes would become your greatest lessons. Yet somehow, you survived every one of those unknowns. So why does uncertainty suddenly feel unbearable now? Perhaps because adulthood creates an illusion that mature people should have everything figured out. That if you're responsible enough, careful enough, prepared enough, life will eventually become predictable. But reality refuses to make that promise. No amount of intelligence removes uncertainty. No amount of money eliminates it. No amount of planning defeats it. Life has always required something more difficult than certainty. Trust. Not blind optimism. Not pretending bad things never happen. Trusting that you can face reality, even when you cannot control it. Anxiety quietly replaces that trust with a different belief. If I can't control what happens, I should at least control every possible scenario inside my head. At first that sounds reasonable, until you realize you've stopped living in today, because you're busy negotiating with a tomorrow that doesn't even exist. And perhaps that's the greatest theft anxiety ever commits. It doesn't only steal peace, it steals presence. Your body remains here, your mind leaves. It travels days, months, sometimes years ahead, trying to solve a future that keeps changing before it ever arrives. Meanwhile, the only moment where life can actually be lived keeps passing unnoticed. One of the most dangerous things about anxiety is that it rarely asks for your attention. It asks for your agreement. Think about how quietly it begins. A single thought appears. What if they don't like me? What if I lose my job? What if something is wrong with my child? The thought arrives. You don't question it. You don't examine it. You simply follow it. One question becomes 5. 5 become 20. Within minutes, you've built an entire future, without a single piece of new evidence. That's the power of an unquestioned thought. It doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be believed. Imagine sitting in a courtroom where only one witness is allowed to speak. The prosecutor presents every frightening possibility, every worst-case scenario, every painful memory, every failure you've ever experienced. But the defense is never called. No one asks, what evidence supports this? What evidence contradicts it? Is this fact, or fear pretending to be fact? Anxiety is remarkably skilled at presenting assumptions as conclusions, and because those assumptions arrive wrapped in emotion, they feel true. But feelings are not reliable judges of reality. You can feel abandoned while being deeply loved. You can feel incapable while possessing everything needed to succeed. You can feel unsafe while sitting peacefully in your own home. Emotion is real, but emotion is not always accurate. That distinction changes lives, because the goal isn't to stop feeling anxiety. The goal is to stop treating every anxious thought as unquestionable truth. The healthiest minds are not the ones that never experience fearful thoughts. They're the ones that learn to ask a simple question before believing them. Is this reality, or is this only a story my mind is telling me? There's a question anxiety almost never wants you to ask, because if you ask it honestly, its influence begins to weaken. The question is this: what problem am I actually solving right now? Not tomorrow, not next month. Right now. You'll be surprised how often the answer is none. You're thinking, but you're not solving. You're imagining, but you're not preparing. You're exhausting yourself and without moving a single step forward. This is where many people confuse anxiety with productivity. Their mind is busy all day, so they assume they're making progress. But movement inside your head isn't always movement in your life. You can spend hours mentally rehearsing a conversation and still never have it. You can imagine every possible outcome of an interview and still never submit the application. You can analyze a relationship from every angle, while avoiding the one honest conversation that could change everything. Anxiety loves internal activity, because internal activity feels productive without exposing you to real risk. Reality is different. Reality demands action. Action carries uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what anxiety fears most. That's why anxiety often keeps people trapped in preparation. I'll do it when I feel ready. I'll apply when I'm more confident. I'll start when I stop feeling afraid. But what if readiness isn't something you wait for? What if it is something you build by acting before certainty ever arrives? Think about every meaningful moment in your life. Did you feel completely ready? Probably not. The first day at a new job, the first time you loved someone, the first difficult decision you had to make, the first time you admitted you were wrong. Growth has never required certainty. It has always required courage. And courage isn't the absence of anxiety. It's the decision that anxiety doesn't get the final vote. Perhaps that's why one of the greatest misunderstandings about peace is believing that peace comes from eliminating uncertainty. It doesn't. If that were true, the wealthiest people on earth would never struggle with anxiety. The most intelligent would never lose sleep. The most prepared would never feel overwhelmed. But they do. Because peace has never depended on having complete control. It depends on knowing what deserves your attention and what deserves your trust. Anxiety reverses those two things. It convinces you to carry burdens that were never yours to carry, to answer questions that cannot yet be answered, to live tomorrow before today has even been finished. There is an old kind of wisdom that says each day already carries enough responsibility of its own. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because tomorrow cannot be lived today. Every hour spent mentally living in a future that hasn't arrived is an hour borrowed from the only moment where your choices actually exist. That's why anxiety is so exhausting. It asks you to fight battles on two fronts, the real one and the imaginary one. Eventually, the imaginary battle becomes so loud that you no longer have the strength for the real one. So perhaps the question isn't, how do I stop every anxious thought? Perhaps the better question is, which thoughts deserve my attention and which ones are simply asking for it? Those are very different questions. Not every thought deserves to become a belief. Not every fear deserves to become a plan. Not every possibility deserves to become today's reality. Wisdom begins the moment you stop giving every frightening thought the authority to decide how you live. Before we end, I want to leave you with one final thought. Anxiety is not dangerous because it makes you think about the future. Planning for the future is part of wisdom. Anxiety becomes dangerous when it convinces you to live there. Every day it whispers, just solve tomorrow first. But tomorrow never arrives. When tomorrow becomes today, anxiety simply chooses another tomorrow, and so life slowly disappears. Not through one great tragedy, but through thousands of moments that were never truly lived. The truth is, your mind will always be capable of imagining a darker future than reality eventually delivers. That's what it does. But you don't have to believe every story it tells. You can pause. You can question it. You can ask, is this reality, or is this fear speaking? Sometimes, that single question is enough to break the spell, because anxiety loses much of its power the moment you stop confusing its stories with the truth. Your future has never asked you to predict everything. It has only asked you to be faithful with today. Today is where decisions are made. Today is where courage is practiced. Today is where peace can begin. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because you've stopped giving fear permission to write tomorrow's story before tomorrow even exists. If this conversation helped you see anxiety from a different perspective, subscribe to Made for More. Every week, we explore wisdom, faith, psychology, and the truths of human nature. Not with easy answers, but with ideas that challenge the way we think and help us become who we were created to be. If this video spoke to you, consider sharing it with someone who may need it today. Until next time, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and remember,